Welcome to the Plant Fit Summit, bringing you the best in plant-based health and fitness. This is Luke and Toby, and today we have Dr. Jim Loomis. Dr. Loomis is board certified in internal medicine and has also completed the certification program in plant-based nutrition from Cornell University. He has also served as team internist for the St. Louis Rams football team and the St. Louis Cardinals baseball team as well. He now serves as the medical director for the Barnard Medical Center in Washington, D.C. We start the conversation with Dr. Loomis sharing about what the response has been since the movie Game Changers was released. Enjoy the presentation.
For the most part, I think the consensus has been overwhelmingly positive. And every day, it really amazes me actually, because I'll be in a Uber, right? Going to a conference or something, and someone will say, well, what are you here for? So I'm at this lifestyle conference and I'm speaking on plant-based nutrition. And the Uber driver says, well, I'm trying to transition to a plant-based diet because I just saw this documentary, The Game Changers. And I hear this every day. It happened to me in an Uber just last week, actually. So I think it's been overwhelmingly positive because, I think an American politician once said, we can all have our own opinions, but we can't have our own facts. And what I'm proud of and what I really am glad that the producers and the Game Changers made an effort explicitly to make the documentary evidence-based. And I can tell you that there's, although my part of the movie is very small, we probably recorded 45 minutes and hours worth of interview. And afterwards, James Wilkes, the producer, asked me to send him a stack of scientific papers to back up every single comment I made. And there was a couple times where the science and my comments didn't quite align. Those statements did not make the cut. So, facts are facts and opinions are opinions. And the facts are that you don't have to eat meat to perform at a very high level, whether you're an endurance athlete or a strength trained athlete or a sprinter or whatever. And if you don't eat meat, you'll be healthier. If your family doesn't eat meat, they'll be healthier and the planet will be healthier. And those are just facts. And I think the naysayers, the people that have pushed back against the movie, I think either didn't really watch it or weren't paying attention. And because again, those are really irrefutable facts and evidence-based and with strong science behind it.
So where the naysayers are concerned, what were the common criticisms of the movie that you know of?
Well, so a lot of people talked about, they cherry pick the data and on and on and on. And, and again, the movie wasn't saying you can't perform if you don't eat, you have to eat plants to perform, that you can't eat meat and perform at a high level. That's clearly not true. There are many, many, many very, very high performing professional athletes and amateur athletes who are not plant-based. And that, I think there's just a lot of misconceptions. And, I think unfortunately, especially with social media today, for the first time in world history, we have as much of the world's knowledge at our fingertips as we've ever had, right? But I think in general, as a society, we've lost our ability to critically think. And so, we get these preconceived notions wherever they came from, whether it be about nutrition or politics or whatever. And then we put ourselves in an echo chamber around other people who think the same way we do. And so when someone pushes back against the movie in a forum on, paleo forum or whatever, then that pushback gets echoed around, even though it may not be based in science or evidence. And I think, and a lot of the pushback has been really been concentrated, if you will, in these specific kind of carnivorous, if you will, communities, as you well know.
Indeed. I think one of the pushbacks and one of the criticisms particularly that I've heard, because I've been on panels myself, is the experiment where I think it was Dr. Spitz that did that study on, the sleep and the erection. So could you maybe unpack that a little bit more? Because they say, oh, that's not true. That can't be
Sure.
true.
I think that, first of all, Dr. Spitz clearly disclaimed in that segment that this was not a scientific study, but the results were interesting and it warranted further study, and that kind of research is being done. And I think that you talk to men who have gone plant-based, I don't know that anyone would complain that erectile dysfunction is a side effect of the diet. I mean, I think in general, people have experienced, those men have, and women indirectly have experienced the indirect positive side effect of increased erectile function, and that's just a fact. I mean, again, there's no double-blind controlled study out there, but that doesn't necessarily mean lack of evidence, doesn't mean lack of efficacy, if you will. And again, if you I think if you did a survey of plant-based athletes, or in general, people that have adapted a plant-based diet, I think the majority would say they've had improvements in circulation, if you will.
And circulations means, I guess, erections, yes, and recovery,
yes,
health,
exactly.
Lung capacity. Yep.
But it's interesting because, so why would it be that a plant-based diet would improve erectile dysfunction? I think this is a very important point, actually. It's clear that erectile dysfunction is actually felt these days to be the canary in the coal mine for coronary artery disease, because the root cause of erectile dysfunction for most people is endothelial dysfunction. So for a male to attain and maintain erection, you have to dilate the blood vessels to allow blood in, and then they constrict to keep the blood from escaping for a period of time. And when those blood vessels can no longer contract and dilate appropriately, because the endothelium is this single cell lining of the blood vessel that controls constriction and dilatation of the blood vessel, then erectile dysfunction ensues. And that's the same process actually that occurs in coronary artery disease. It starts with erectile, with endothelial dysfunction. And so I think that the reason, if you look at, there's a lot of research around improvements in endothelial function, not specifically around erectile dysfunction, but about coronary artery disease. It mainly has to do with activation of a compound called nitric oxide. So nitric oxide stimulates the endothelial to function well and allow it to dilate like it should. And plant-based foods have high levels of nitric oxide. So beets and kale and arugula and things like that. And so that's one reason why plant-based diets have been shown to reduce the risk and even reverse heart disease. But it also, in an athlete setting, it's probably one of the reasons that people are able to perform at a higher level, because when you're able to deliver blood more efficiently to your working muscles, because the blood vessels are very compliant and able to function normally, increased performance ensues. So it's not only increased performance, erectile performance, but also athletic performance, cardiovascular disease, on and on and on. And so that there's a common thread there, which plant-based diets address directly.
Indeed, and immunity as well, because I know plant-based foods have, 64 times more antioxidants than any really animal-based foods as well. So I think it's bang for buck. So with where athletes is concerned, post-game changes, are you starting to see more athletes moving towards plant-based diet? And what's your experience?
Yeah, so I have seen more athletes moving toward a plant-based diet, because again, the movie makes a very compelling argument that a plant-based diet can improve performance. And it's interesting too. Again, there certainly are no double-blind controlled studies where you take a bunch of athletes and put half on a plant-based diet and half on a omnivorous kind of standard American diet or paleo diet or keto diet or whatever, and looking at specific measures of athletic performance. There are certainly studies that have been done that show that there's no difference in performance between the two. So in other words, your performance doesn't degrade; it doesn't get worse when you go on a plant-based diet, which is, there have been arguments in the kind of the low carb community that, your performance actually decreases. There's a lot of studies to suggest that there's in fact no difference between performance. As you know, when you talk to plant-based athletes, the number one thing they notice after they've gone plant-based is the ability to recover from exercise, right? Which obviously the faster you recover, the more work you're able to do the next day, which over time enhances your performance. So what we don't know is what the study that would be interesting would take an individual athlete and measure their performance before and after a plant-based diet across an individual, not a population, right? Because I think that from my own personal experience, I mean, that's the thing I noticed so I last year, almost a year ago, it's a year ago next weekend, I had just turned 60 years old, and I decided to try to unsuccessfully kill myself by training for and competing in an Ironman triathlon, which is a 2.4 mile swim, 112 mile bike. And then if that's not enough, you get to run a marathon on the back end. And so I was probably training harder than I've ever trained in my entire life at age 60. And it was really astounding how quickly I recovered. The really minimum amount of muscle soreness and stiffness that I had after, intense, 80-mile bike ride with a 5-mile run off the bike on Saturday, and then a 15-mile run and a 4,000 meter swim on Sunday. And Monday rolls around, I'm not sore, I'm not stiff. I mean, it was really amazing. And I think that's a function of, as you mentioned earlier, the antioxidant capacity of the diet itself, the low level of omega-6 to omega-3 ratio, because omega-6s create inflammation that's inherent in a whole food plant-based diet. So there's a lot of reasons for that. The increased nitric oxide, which improves blood flow, which can wash out the accumulated toxins that occur with exercise, lactic acid, and things like that. So there's a lot of reasons for that. And again, all the athletes that have made that transition have the same experience for the most part. I've never had someone come in and say, I went on a plant-based diet and I had to stop because I felt worse, right? No one has ever told me that.
I'm almost hitting my decade as well, and I experienced all of those things and more. So I think it's incredible, and I want to kind of pick up on what you just shared about omega-3 to omega-6 ratio. So I'm aware of what it is. Maybe for those that don't know what the ratio is, maybe you could share what that is and how it impacts recovery, health.
Yeah. So this is I honestly think that inflammation. I remember the first time I went to a plant-based nutrition healthcare conference, and there was a talk on multiple sclerosis and one on Alzheimer's disease and one on cancer, one on heart disease, one on diabetes. And at some point in every talk, they put up the same slide, and it was about inflammation, right? Because inflammation is really the fundamental driver of many, many chronic diseases that plague us in modern society, from cancer and heart disease, autoimmune disease, etc. So where does this inflammation come from, right? Well, one of the biggest drivers is the ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 fatty acids in our diet. Omega-6 fatty acids create compounds through a chain. We typically ingest short-chain fatty acids like alpha-linoleic acid, which gets elongated to arachidonic acid, which is the precursor to pro-inflammatory compounds. And we need inflammation, right? Because we need to heal wounds and fight infections and things like that. On the other side of the coin is the omega 3 fatty acids, which create compounds that are anti-inflammatory. I misspoke. Alpha-linoleic acid is on the omega 3 side. Linoleic acid is on the omega 6 side. So ALA is elongated down to DHA and EPA, which serve as the precursors for anti-inflammatory compounds. And again, if you think about it from an evolutionary standpoint, we actually have a preference for inflammation because we needed to be able to heal wounds and fight infections to survive long enough to find our next meal or fight off the leopard. And it's felt that if you look at the best we know about ancestral diets and kind of what's the optimal omega-6 omega-3 ratio, it's felt to be less than 5 to 1, probably 2 to 3 to 1. Some people argue 1 to 1, but I think there's evidence probably 2 to 3 to 1 in my mind is probably ideal for an omega-6, omega-3 ratio. Standard American diet, you see ratios between 20 and 50 to 1, right? Plant-based diets inherently is in that 2 to 3 range. Now, this is, I think, so where do these omega-6s and omega-3s come from? Now, they're actually all plant-derived. Now, we talk about meat and dairy is a major source of omega-6 fatty acids, but that's because of what we feed meat, dairy, and chicken, and meat, cows and chickens and pigs and even fish now, right? It is mainly corn. So corn oil has an 83 to 1 omega-6, omega-3 ratio, right? And so it's probably one of the most inflammatory oils out there. And on the omega-3 side, we talk about fish oil, but up the food chain, the fish actually get it from marine phytoplankton and algae, right? So these are plant-derived. Other important sources of omega-3 in a plant-based diet are hemp seed and walnuts and pumpkin seeds and flax seeds and things like that. On the omega-6 side, and I think this is an important distinction. It's very important when I talk to my patients about the distinction between a whole food plant-based diet and a vegan diet, okay? And this is the reason why. You can be vegan or vegetarian and still have very high levels of omega-6 intake, mainly through the overconsumption of edible oils, okay? So even olive oil has an omega-6, omega-3 ratio of about 13 to 2. So, 7 and 6.5, 7 to 1. That's still way above that optimum 2 to 3 range, right? And that's why, many of the more processed vegan foods, they may be better for the animals and better for the environment, but they may not be better for you because of there's still some inflammation involved. So now you might ask why, if I have a high omega-6, omega-3 ratio, why don't I just take a bunch of fish oil pills or whatever, right? Well, the problem is this. As I mentioned earlier, we ingest linoleic acid on the omega-6 side, alpha linoleic acid on the omega-3 side, and those get elongated down to the arachidonic acid and DHA, EPA. And they're elongated by a series of enzymes, and those enzymes compete for each other's attention, okay? The problem is because we have an evolutionary preference for omega-6, if you have a high omega-6 level, even if you're ingesting enough omega-3, you can't convert it to the long-chain fatty acids because those enzymes are being consumed on the omega-6 side. And second of all, if your ratio is 20 to 1, you'd have to drink a gallon, or you'd have to take so much omega-3, you wouldn't be able to handle that. And so really the key to create an anti-inflammatory milieu within your body is a combination of decreasing your omega-6 intake, mainly through the not consuming animal products and then edible oils, and then increasing your omega-3 intake, which is really focusing on the foods I talked about, pumpkin seeds, flax seed, hemp seed, things like that. Now, during my training, I did take an algae-based omega-3 supplement to kind of bump that up. And I know many athletes who do that and such. Now, it's interesting. The other source of inflammation, by the way, and that contributes to a detriment in athletic performance, in particular the delayed onset muscle soreness and stiffness you see after a hard workout, is oxidative stress. You had alluded to this earlier. We burn oxygen and to help fuel ourselves, and one of the natural byproducts of that are called oxygen-free radicals. And oxygen-free radicals in small doses play a very important role in cell signaling, right? So, for example, you start exercising, your oxygen consumption goes up, your oxygen-free radical levels go up. And that sends a signal to our muscles, hey, I'm getting ready to damage you. So fix me when I'm done, right? Very important. The problem is our bodies have a very limited capacity innately to mitigate oxidative stress. The only way we can gain extra antioxidant capacity is through the consumption of dietary antioxidants. Where do you find dietary antioxidants? Only in plants, okay? And not only that, in modern world, we expose ourselves to a lot of extra oxidative stress, things like environmental pollutants, psychological stress, obesity, diabetes, on and on, can contribute to increased levels of oxidative stress. So when we've got this kind of double whammy where we're not consuming antioxidants and we live in this stressful environment, if you will, then that predisposes you to not only chronic disease, because in oxidative stress in excess, as I mentioned earlier, can damage cell walls. It actually damages DNA. Increased risk for cancer, can increase risk for cataracts and diabetes. It oxidizes the LDL particles, which are the bad cholesterol particles, which makes them, in the setting of endothelial dysfunction, makes them more reactive with the blood vessel wall. So excess oxidative stress has a lot of negative consequences to our health beyond the muscle soreness and stiffness you see in an athlete.
You shared quite a fair bit there. Definitely oxidative stress is a big one. And I kind of want to backtrack and I kind of tie a knot on the omega-3 one before we actually move into inflammation and maybe oxidative stress. But when omega-3 is concerned, based on what you were sharing as well, my understanding of omega-3s, especially from fish oil, not only that, you're also adding environmental toxicity because PCBs and lead and stuff like that, because they're high up in the food chain. So my understanding is that plant-based eaters are better converters of short chain to long chain omega-3s, EPA, DHA. Why is that? Can you explain maybe some reasons why plant-based eaters just need a couple of tablespoons of flax seeds, and compared to possibly a meat eater who might need to supplement with fish oils?
Right. I think it's because of the lower levels of omega-6, which frees up those enzymes, like I said earlier, because there's a competition between the enzymes to convert the short chain omega-6 fatty acids to arachidonic acid and the short chain omega-3s down to DHA, EPA. And so inherently a plant-based diet has especially if you're really watching your edible oils, has a much lower intake of omega-6, and then that frees up those enzymes to make you more efficient at the conversion of omega-3. So I think it's a decrease in omega-6 in consumption, which drives the increased efficiency of the omega-3s.
So with that in mind, would you recommend for people to supplement, or plant-based eaters to supplement with an omega-3 supplement? Because there's, some doctors say yes, some doctors say no, and you can just get it from a couple of tablespoons of flax seeds. What's your take on it?
It's variable. It depends on the patient. Okay. So for some patients, getting rid of all that edible oil is the last step in the hardest, because it's hidden in a lot of places. You can get some really healthy looking lentil chips at the grocery store, Trader Joe's or Whole Foods. They still have a lot of edible oil, right? And so especially for patients who have a chronic inflammatory condition, right? Type 2 diabetes or autoimmune disease, as they're transitioning to a whole food plant-based diet, oftentimes I'll put them on an omega-3, an algae-based omega-3 supplement, just for that 3 to 6 months as they're making that transition, learning new food ways, learning how to cook without oil and things like that. As far as athletes go, I think especially ultra endurance athletes who really create a lot of inflammation, I don't think it's unreasonable to supplement with algae-based omega-3s. The evidence is not huge. There's not a lot of evidence out there around that. There is a little bit, but not a lot. As I said earlier, when I'm training hard, I actually take an algae-based omega-3 myself. But for most people, once you get to that low oil or no oil whole food plant-based, then you are correct that you probably do not need to supplement with omega-3s. But most people are kind of in that, for many people, it's kind of hard to get all the way in. And especially when you start out dealing with conditions that have an inflammatory component, I will supplement them at least for the short term.
Indeed. So you mentioned endurance athletes, and I think this is another aspect that fitness enthusiasts and maybe strength athletes also wonder, what does science say? How much protein do you need? I mean, you've probably been asked this question
Yeah.
many a time, but for strength athletes or fitness enthusiasts, they've got that 1.6 to 1.8 endurance. What's your take on that?
Well, so if you look closely at the study, so unlike carbohydrates and fat, we store extra carbohydrate in our bodies. And we store carbohydrate in our body as glycogen, which is the fuel for short bouts of exercise and more intense bouts of exercise. If there's any carbohydrate left, it goes back to the liver and we create triglyceride to store it as fat. Fat we store as fat. However, protein we can't store really. And so when we ingest enough protein to kind of take care of our body's needs, resynthesizing muscle and the kind of the day-to-day repair, that extra protein goes to the liver and it's converted to urea, a nitrogen-based compound, and excreted in our urine. So we can actually measure how much protein it takes to create what's called nitrogen balance. So when do you start to see excess nitrogen show up in the urine? And that's the point where you don't need it, where any extra protein's just being excreted in the urine. So there's some very interesting studies. So if you look at nitrogen balance in an endurance athlete, it runs from about 1.2 to about 1.5, maybe 1.6 on the upper end. If you look at that same data in a strength training athlete, it's about 1.4, 1.5, and then some studies suggest up to 1.8, closer to 2. But anything above 2 for sure, puts you in a negative nitrogen, in a positive nitrogen balance. So you start to excrete the extra protein into our kidneys. And that's not without consequence. The excretion of protein in the urine puts a burden on the kidneys. It's actually high levels of long-term excess protein consumption have been associated with increased risk for kidney disease. We also know that particularly animal-based proteins seem to increase the risk of cancer over the long run. And there's some theories as to why, depending on the source of the increased protein consumption, especially dairy. It seems to be related to increased consumption of insulin growth factor 1, IGF. IGF is an anabolic compound. It promotes tissue growth, and when we overstimulate IGF, it may contribute to tumor growth as well. We also know that elevated levels of protein may be associated with, the other reason, by the way, it may be related to cancer is, so proteins, and this is an important point in general about protein, but because there's a lot of misconception. You don't eat protein and then absorb protein, right? That's not how it works. You ingest protein. The protein in our digestive tract, the protein's actually broken down to its individual amino acids, and then those amino acids are absorbed individually, sent back to the liver, and then kind of reassembled to make whatever proteins you need. That's how it works. And the proteins that are found in animal-based products are more highly methylated. So there's a sulfur compound on those proteins, and those seem to be more carcinogenic. They seem to be more higher propensity to damage DNA and things like that, which may be why, for example, excess protein, particularly red meat and processed meats, associated with certain cancers like colon cancer, for example. The other issue that I think, again, these kind of conversations are important, but they're a symptom of the way we think about nutrition today, nutritional reductionism, right? That we've stopped talking about food. We're not talking about food right now, right? We're talking about protein. And when we break food down to its individual components, it gives us some kind of wacky ideas about food. 30 years ago, we were worshiping carbs and demonizing fat. Now we're worshiping protein and demonizing carbs. Carbs aren't the problem. Protein's not the problem. Fat's not the problem. It's the package they come in. And I think an important example of this is when we get our protein, particularly from red meat, that also contains high levels of heme iron. Heme iron is a very potent pro-oxidant. We talked about oxidative stress. Excess consumption of heme iron. So heme iron means that the iron is bound to hemoglobin. And hemoglobin is the red blood cell that is in our blood cells. It's the protein that carries oxygen. That's what makes our blood red. So when we consume, especially red meat, we're actually consuming that dead animal blood, which is disgusting if you think about it. And I never thought of it that way, but it is disgusting, I think. but those pro-oxidant compounds have been shown to damage DNA, as I said earlier. And again, and also the LDL, the pro-oxidant effect by oxidizing the LDL particles. And it may be why the overconsumption of especially animal-based proteins, and red meat in particular, is associated with an increased risk for heart disease and colon cancer. So I think you have to be careful just talking about protein, right? In general, and because protein's not the problem, it's the package they come in. And it's been shown that when we package the protein in plants, that it's much more healthful. And because, it's anti-inflammatory and on.
Going back to what you're saying about the nitrogen balance and excretion of protein, because within the plant-based world, I know there are some strength athletes, some bodybuilders who consume maybe a whole food plant-based diet and maybe a high amount of protein each meal. So with that in mind, is there a maximum amount of protein per meal that your body can absorb before it starts excreting? Some people say 30 grams, some people say 40 grams. What does the science say?
Yeah, I think that's about right. I think about 30 grams is about as much as you can, is the body can absorb. So going over that again will put most people into a positive nitrogen balance. And it's it's interesting because this whole protein thing is crazy to start with, right? I mean, you turn on a special on National Geographic and there's a special on mountain gorillas or on elephants, right? The first thing that pops in your mind, oh my God, where are they getting their protein? Well, of course not, right? Well, these are some of the biggest, strongest animals on the planet, and they're herbivores. So why an omnivorous athlete would worry about where I get my protein when I'm training 3-4 hours a day and 6, 7, 8 hours a day on the weekend, or the hard workouts you do? Why are they worried about where you get your protein? It just doesn't make sense, right? But again, where do most people get their nutrition advice, right? Well, in the gym, right? So we have all this kind of bro science out there about we talked earlier about the echo chamber that just reinforces whatever preconceived notions we have about nutrition or whatever. And bro science is a big issue, especially in the more strength in the strength trained community. And the science does not support these high levels of protein. In fact, supports the fact that they cause chronic health issues over the long run.
Over the long run, I think that's an important point, because I know of many non-plant-based athletes who are probably performing well and on a non-plant-based diet. I would say even a keto or a high protein diet. So what's your take on that? Because they do their blood work, they've got a low body composition, and they watch the Game Changers, and it's probably the same guys that say, well, that's BS. I'm doing all I'm doing, and look at my body composition, look at my blood work. So what's your take on that?
Well, I really like to think of all this through the lens of our evolutionary biology. Okay. And first of all, we as human beings, we evolved to be physically active because we had to be physically active to survive, right? We had to be able to go find food when we're starving and not be someone else's food when they were starving. And that required physical activity. And our main, the reason, like any living creature, we evolved to accomplish the singular task of staying around long enough and finding a mate and passing on our DNA, right? And again, to accomplish that, those were the two primary tasks. That's where our stress came from. We have a stress response with adrenaline to get us ready to perform physical activity. We have cortisol, which helps us recover from physical activity. You look at the biomechanics of the human foot and ankle, our knees, our hips, our cardiovascular system, all of that evolved to be physically active, right? You look at our energy systems, right? The way we fuel our body with glycogen primarily for, as I said earlier, short bursts of physical activity and more intense physical activity. For longer activity, greater than about 2 or 3 hours in most people, we use fat to primarily fuel ourselves. And all is good. We also evolved many protections against starvation, right? We have no protections against the other end of malnutrition, by the way, right? Which is overnutrition, right? And one of the one of the mechanisms we evolved to help us survive starvation was the ability of our brains as an end game, just before we starved, to use ketone bodies as fuel. So the brain can't store energy like our muscles and liver and heart and such. It has to rely on primarily blood glucose that circulates in our bloodstream. And we have a very sophisticated system to ensure that there's plenty of glucose in our blood at all times to fuel our brains. Much of that is regulated through the glycogen that's stored primarily in our liver. And so what happens is when we're starving to death and we've depleted all of our glycogen, there's we don't have any more fuel to dump into the bloodstream to fuel our brains. We start to catabolize our body. We start to break down protein and things like that, which creates these ketone bodies. And that is literally the end game. It's just trying to keep you alive for that last little bit, hoping that you can find food before you starve. So the first keto diet was famine, starvation, right? So the idea that we should manipulate our diet somehow and create an artificial ketotic state doesn't make any sense whatsoever from a evolutionary biologic state, right? I mean, it just doesn't make sense. What's interesting is that there is some interesting evidence about intermittent fasting and improvements in both athletic performance for a lot of reasons, but also health in general. And at the end of a fasting period, sometimes you will develop mild ketosis, but in that situation, you're replicating the way that the body's designed to become ketotic. Because if you're trying to do that through dietary manipulation, low carb diet, high protein, oftentimes high fat, we know that the long-term consequences of a high fat, high protein diet, when you look at risk for colon cancer and cancer in general, diabetes, heart disease, it goes through the roof. And I've had many patients who went on a ketotic diet, their cholesterol shot through the roof because they're eating so much fat. So I think sometimes, it's hard when you're young and you're healthy and you want to look buff, so that when you go to the beach or whatever, it's hard to kind of look through the lens of, into the future and see yourself not healthy, right? And so I think, again, that's why it's important to teach young athletes the proper way, what the science supports proper nutrition, not only for performance, but also long-term health. And again, I think that's one of the points that the movie The Game Changers tried to make was it's not just short-term athletic performance, it's also looking at the arc of your life and health, and how do you sustain, life in your years as you age, as opposed to, developing chronic medical conditions, which don't allow you to live life to the fullest as you age. I mean, I'm a good example of that, frankly. I mean, at age 50, I was very unhealthy. At age 60, I'm, probably in the best shape I've ever been in my whole life. 60, I just turned 61, actually. People ask me how old I am. I might tell them I'm 31 with 30 years experience, right? Because that's how I feel. And there's no way I could perform athletically the way I perform and be as healthy as I am at my age without a combination of a whole food plant-based diet, regular physical activity, stress management, and sleep, which are really the pillars of a healthy lifestyle.
Lifestyle is key, because I remember when I was 25 and going on a high protein, low carb diet, all I was thinking of getting lean and getting jacked. But now at 41, I'm just thinking about joint mobility and thinking about being around for my daughter, being there for my, being a granddad and stuff like that. And you don't think about these things when you're 25, and because your body is almost bulletproof to a certain degree. So I know, a lot of people would probably turn towards a keto or low carb diet for body composition, really, fat loss, muscle gain, leanness, being X amount of body fat. So on the flip side, I know plant-based people, and you and I know many, many people that have gone from a kind of animal-based diet to a plant-based diet and lost significant amount of body fat, and have maintained a low body composition without actually trying at all,
Right.
without actually dieting. So how, it's just like Chef AJ says, how you can eat more and weigh less. So what specifically in a plant-based diet accelerates, improve body composition or weight loss?
Great question. So raise my hand, right? I lost 70 pounds on a plant-based diet, without trying. The first 40 pounds I lost, I did without doing anything other than I'd injured my knee back in the fall of 2010, had to have surgery. I had to wait 3 months to get surgery because I was really busy, so my leg got weak. I torn my meniscus. And by the time I got surgery, now my leg's weak. Rehab wasn't very much fun, so I just didn't do it. And so next thing I know, I gained a lot of weight. So the first 3 months I transitioned to a plant-based diet in the summer of 2011. It was diet and then knee rehab, right? So there was really no aerobic activity to speak of, right? And I lost 30, 40 pounds just like that in 3 months and dropped my cholesterol 100 points. So why is that? It's a great question. And I think it's very important because this discussion really transcends the discussion around is eating animal versus plant-based and such. And it's the concept of nutrient density. So, when we have extra money, we want to invest it in our financial future, right? And what we're looking for is a positive ROI, return on investment. That's how we should think about nutrition, but it's not, because every calorie you put in your mouth is either an investment in your health future or it's not, right? So let's just say you have 100 calories to invest right this minute. You can invest however you want. You can invest it in olive oil. You can invest it in boneless, skinless chicken breast or salmon, because you heard that lean protein is good for you. Or you can invest it in broccoli, okay? So first of all, 100 calories of olive oil. How much is that? Well, it's about 5 cc's, about 5 milliliters, about a tablespoon. How much space does that take up in your stomach? Well, not very much, right? And what do you get back from that besides fat? How much protein is in 100 calories of olive oil? Zero, right? How much fiber? Zero. What about the cancer-fighting phytonutrients, antioxidants that we talked about earlier? Healthy omega-3s, zero, right? A little bit of omega-3, but there's no antioxidants, right? Not a great return on your nutritional investment. 100 calories of chicken breast or salmon is about an ounce. What do you get back from that ounce? And so that doesn't take up very much space in your stomach either. And what do you get back from that besides protein and fat, right? Nothing. There's no fiber. There's no cancer-fighting phytonutrients. There's no potassium that's going to lower your blood pressure, on and on and on. 100 calories of broccoli is 12 ounces. That is a lot of broccoli. And what else do you get? Well, you're getting 6-8 grams of fiber. You're getting 5, 6, 7 grams of protein, almost as much as an egg. Plus you're getting all these cancer-fighting phytonutrients and antioxidants to improve your overall health. And you're full. So that's really the beauty of a whole food plant-based diet. It's not a diet, right? You eat, people ask me, well, do you count calories? No, I eat when I'm hungry. And when I'm not hungry anymore, I stop eating. And when I'm hungry again, I eat. And that's it, right? And what's interesting about that, back to the protein argument, right? So let's just say, if you do the math backwards, so a whole food plant-based diet has about 15% protein on average, somewhere in there, right? And so say I'm, an endurance athlete, and I'm taking in, I'm kind of in just some standard, just trying to stay healthy. I'm eating a couple thousand calories a day. Well, if I weigh, say, 75, 80 kilos, and you work that math backwards, guess what? 15% protein in a 2,000 calorie diet is about, for an 80 kilo guy, or girl, is about 1.2, 1.3 grams per kilo, right? So I'm training for Ironman, right? I'm not eating 2,000 calories a day. I might be eating 4,000 calories a day. What's happened to my protein intake? It's doubled, right? It's not more protein you need, it's more calories, right? And if you match the calories to your needs, then protein's not a problem, carbs are not a problem, etc. And so I think the concept of nutrient density is very important. So Chef AJ actually you mentioned earlier, has a great chart, it's calories per pound, So there's green zone, red zone, and then a couple of purple foods like avocado and nuts and seeds, which are whole food plant-based, but do have a fairly large, fairly significant caloric density as opposed to nutrient density. Fruit on average has, a couple hundred calories per pound, right? So the big sporting event comes on, your favorite movie comes on, you sit down with a bag of Doritos. How hard would it be to eat 1,000 calories of Doritos before the movie's over? Right? Not hard at all. Try to eat 1,000 calories of blueberries in 2 or 3 days. You can't do it, right? Because it's nutrient dense. And so nutrient density is really the key to weight loss and improvements in our overall health on a whole food plant-based diet.
Yeah, I'm very aware of Chef AJ's chart, and she shows, it's really, whole food plant-based is really about 100 to 600 calories per pound versus
exactly right.
700 to 4,000 calories per pound.
Right.
I think pure oil is 4,000 calories per pound,
right.
which is in our world 450 grams or 500 grams. So that's a lot of calories in 1 tablespoon. Let's just say that.
Yeah, exactly. That was my point earlier about it. But nutrient density is really the key, and that's why, again, I do with my patients and make a clear distinction between a plant-based diet and a vegan diet. No, veganism comes from an ethical place. It's about compassion and not wearing animal products and using products tested on animals, and not eating anything made with animals. That certainly, as I've gone on my plant-based journey over the past 10 years, I entered this through the lens of my own personal health. I thought vegans wore Birkenstocks and hugged trees, but certainly I think we all have a lot of cognitive dissonance around our food, and when we find out where our food really comes from, if you need another reason to go plant-based, that certainly can be it. But that being said, there's a lot of really unhealthy stuff that's vegan, right? White flour's vegan, sugar's vegan, Oreos are vegan, Dr. Pepper's vegan, and I think some of these, the Impossible Burger and things like that, certainly important for the environment, certainly important for the animal, but may not necessarily be better for you as an individual from a health standpoint. Highly processed, lots of fat, on and on. I think it's fine as a transition food, as you're trying to make that transition and kind of find your way and learn more about a plant-based diet. But certainly I don't recommend my patients consume a lot of this highly processed vegan plant-based foods. It's really trying to focus on whole food plant-based, which really it's vegan, don't get me wrong, but it also eliminates the highly processed sugars, highly processed grains, the highly processed edible oils, artificial sweeteners, food dyes, food additives, all that other stuff, which is all vegan, but not healthy.
I think transition is a really good segue to our final piece, because we like to leave the audience with a bit of a takeaway point. So to all the guys or girls that have watched Game Changers and were debunking Game Changers, but suddenly watched your interview and suddenly realized, hey, maybe this guy is right. Maybe I should give this plant-based thing a go. What would you say to them? What would you say to them to transition and move in the best way, best foot forward possible to live and thrive as a plant-based athlete or moving towards being one?
I think most people who try this for even 2 weeks, but if I can get people on it for 4 to 6 weeks, most people feel so much better that that it sells itself, right? That the proof is in the pudding, as they say, that once you make that transition, energy levels, athletic performance, the soreness and stiffness that comes on and on and on. There's various strategies. I went all in, right? I literally overnight, I said, I'm going to just do this. That's difficult for a lot of people. So what if you kind of were to rank the animal-based foods as far as inflammation and such, dairy probably number one, to get rid of dairy first and switch over to more plant-based milks and things like that. Just to comment on dairy briefly, again, if you look at our ancestral diets through the lens of our evolutionary biology, we had to domesticate other mammals to get access to their milk, right? When did that occur? 7,000 to 8,000 years ago. Seems like a long time, blink of an eye if you look at all of human history, right? Second of all, what is dairy, right? It's a biologic fluid that evolved to take baby mammals and turn them into mammals big enough to find food on their own. And once that happens, we don't need our mother's milk anymore. That is why you don't see human milk on the grocery store shelves, right? So the idea that we should be drinking another mammal's milk that evolved to help a 70-pound cow turn into a 700-pound cow makes no sense whatsoever again, from an evolutionary standpoint. And then lastly, we have an enzyme in our gut called lactase, which helps us digest milk sugar. That gene is designed to actually turn off when we're 4 or 5 years old. And if you look at the world population today, 75% of the world today can't digest milk protein, milk sugar, I'm sorry. And it was only because of a genetic mutation in Northern Europe around the time we domesticated mammals at the end of the last ice age, where plant-based protein sources were more scarce, that this genetic mutation occurred, created a transient survival advantage, so that gene got passed into the population. So, I'm not a fan of dairy. Second of all is red and processed meat. That's probably, so those two things is where I start, and then slowly start to transition the more processed foods into, whole grains, fruits, vegetables, things like that. And then slowly reduce the rest. So the chicken and fish, kind of, if you wanted to make it a hierarchy, right? Meat and dairy, red meat and dairy, number one, and then probably chicken next, and then fish next. Fish comes up all the time. What's wrong with fish? Well, there's a couple things wrong with fish. Is eating a piece of salmon every now and then going to kill you? Of course it's not. Is there something in salmon you can't get from plants? No, because all that protein and fat, where did it come from? Up the food chain, it came from the marine phytoplankton and algae we talked about. Are you exposing yourself to environmental toxins? Yes, you already alluded to that when we talked about fish oil. Is it good for the environment? Definitely not. Because there's evidence that if we don't stop overfishing the oceans pretty soon, that there may be complete collapses of fisheries worldwide and by mid-decade, which has catastrophic implications across the world as far as nutrition and conflict and on and on and on. And so again, those animals just serve as the middleman, right? They have taken all the good stuff and run their own machinery, the fiber and the antioxidants. They just concentrate it into to protein and fat. And when we were starving for calories, those sources were probably important. But through sanitation, and also it didn't matter if you ate too much red meat because you're dead at 30 of infectious disease. So you didn't have to worry about, am I going to get cancer or heart disease? We've unmasked all that through sanitation and antibiotics as we've extended human life. And all of which have been associated with the overconsumption of animal fat, animal protein, on and on and on. And then again, the environmental aspects of our diet, I think that's one thing that really, as I learned more and more, again, if you need another reason besides your health and how you feel, the compassion and environment as game changers on the environmental side, I think clearly showed, because the ankle bone is connected to the knee bone, and we have to have a healthy planet for our kids and our grandkids, and we're going to bankrupt that planet pretty soon if we don't change our food ways. And many of the adverse consequences of climate change, overfishing, are all related to our dietary patterns and modern animal husbandry. So sorry I got off track there at the end, but I can't not talk about this stuff.
I think that's important, and that's why we are actually tackling that environmental aspect this summit. Thank you very much. I mean, you've always been an inspiration of mine from the very first day that we met in LA, and to see you, I was cheering you on when you completed your Ironman last year. So,
thank you.
On a personal note, do you have any new goals for the year coming or the next year ahead?
The Ironman training is very time intense, let's just say, right? And my plan this year was to do 2 or 3 half Ironman races, although that's all been put on hold with the pandemic. There's no place to swim for me. The pool's closed and such. So right now I'm just trying to maintain my fitness. I run, every day. I run commute to work. I'll run home today. So I'm really trying to just stay as fit as I can. And really thinking about maybe another Ironman next year, actually, if I can, assuming that the things settle down. The thought has crossed my mind. However crazy I thought it was going to be one and done, right? But as you know, it's never one and done, because about 10 minutes after you cross the finish line, you're looking at your watch. You're like, gosh, if I just would have done that, I could have gone this much faster. And so, the wheels are turning. And I learned a lot about myself during that process. I learned a ton about nutrition and how to properly fuel yourself. I learned a lot about hydration because, you can be in the best shape of your life, and if you mismanage your fluids and nutrition, it doesn't matter how much training you had. So I think next go around, it'll be a lot easier because I've already got all that kind of dialed in from the tons of research and personal experimentation I did to find what was right for me. If anyone would have told me 10 years ago when I was in my early 50s or 50 that I'd be doing an Ironman when I was 60, I would have told them that I might as well buy lottery tickets, because the chance of me winning the lottery would be greater than that. But it is amazing what the human body is capable of, as you well know, right? As you've made your personal transition and the fitness goals and the fitness accomplishments you've had. The human body is an amazing thing if we take care of it. It wants to heal. It wants to perform. We are designed to be physically active. And I think we forget, we are all athletes, right? We are all athletes. When you give your kid a piggyback ride, you're being an athlete. When you carry the laundry up from the basement, you're being an athlete. When you carry the groceries in from the car, you're being an athlete. And our bodies are designed to do that. And I think we forget sometimes that we are all athletic. Some are more athletic than others, but it doesn't matter what level of athleticism you engage in. Leading a healthy lifestyle, eating a healthy diet, recovering from your stress, through sleep and stress management and things like, not smoking, not drinking too much alcohol. It doesn't matter who you are, whether you're an Olympic athlete or a stay-at-home mom. I think we forget that athletic, we are all athletes. And I think it's a very, very important point that I think most of us don't think about.
The moral of the story, don't over-intellectualize and over-analyze, because it's just keep it simple. Don't look at your macros, just focus on whole plant-based foods and keep moving, smiling.
Right. And eat when you're hungry and stop eating when you're not. And that's, if you do those things, I didn't do any kind of food tracker and all that. I just ate. I had big bowls of fruit everywhere. I mean, I just ate, and I ate a lot, but it was, so anyway.
Yeah, indeed, it's liberating. So, well, with that in mind, thank you very much, Dr. Loomis. I really enjoyed our conversation and your energy and all that you've shared, to be honest. So, all you guys listening out there still contemplating, do it, guys. Straight from the doctor of Game Changers. So excellent. Thank you very much, Dr. Loomis.
All right. Thanks for having me on again. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
We hope you've enjoyed this presentation. A wise man once said, "You make a new life by making new choices." Now, if you know that what you eat matters, if you know that health comes from healthy living, then the time to make new choices is now. And just imagine owning the summit for life. Click the button for more. Maybe you know our stories. Luke and I lost family to cancer, and we wish we would have known sooner what you are learning here today. So please, share the summit, take action, and let's support each other. Thank you. This is Toby and Luke signing off, and we can't wait to see you for the next presentation.